Well, hello everyone, and today we have something very special, which is I get the chance to sit down and talk to. See, the puns already start without me even trying. I get to sit down and talk with a friend of mine, but also a new author, which is Chance Dillon, author of Mercy: Tears of the Fallen, which you can pre-order as of the recording of this. The book is not quite out yet, but it will be in a few months. And I'm sure we'll talk about that much more at Chance. If you don't mind just introducing yourself, tell us a little bit about what you do and about the book.
Yeah, totally. My name's Chance. What I do on a day to day, like Monday through Friday, I'm a personal trainer. In the mornings to the early afternoons, and then when I get home, I sit at the computer for like maybe 1 to 3 hours in that range. And I'm a writer, and I just wrote this puppy. I think back in 2023, I started at the end of my military career. I was in the Navy for a little bit, got out, decided that I wanted to take this very seriously, I think from the get-go. And yeah, I'm a writer, author, and I guess those two can go hand in hand. And then booktuber. I'm also a reader. I love fantasy, sci-fi. Yeah, I'm a big fan, just as I am somebody who's trying to put something out there.
Yeah. And as just to get a few technicals out of the way, when can readers expect for Mercy to drop? When's this coming out?
Yeah, so that'll be out July 20th, which is a special day for me. That'll be this year. So from this recording, I guess it's 2 months from now. The ebook is the only thing you can pre-order right now. I'm going to, because Amazon, especially with debut authors, at least in the indie sphere, I have talked to a few. I don't think you can do pre-order physical copies. So the ebook's on sale right now for $1. You can pre-order it for 99 cents in the US market. And I think other markets, it's just a different price looking. And that'll be until June 1st. And then I was told by various other authors that I shouldn't do that, even though I was like, let me just keep it this way for a while. But yeah, so it'll be pre-order there, and then I might do a pre-order on my website, chancedillonauthor.com, the middle of next month. I'm going to try and do like what John, Amy, and Jacob did with Discovery. I'm going to try and do that with Mercy, and that'll be next month at some point. Yeah.
Sure, and we'll make sure Editing Sam here. We'll link Chance's channel down below, but then also the pre-order to Mercy: Tears of the Fallen.
Yeah.
So Chance, obviously you're a big reader. That's how I can say. I'm sure for many people, but at least for myself, first came across your stuff was through your videos. And there's lots of readers out there who talk about like, oh, they've got a trunk novel or some, they get book ideas. I mean, for Pete's sake, my dad's not even a reader, and even my dad has been like, oh, I've got an idea for a book. So everybody has an idea for this type of thing, but even fewer people will start working on writing a book. And of the people who do, it's a much smaller number of people who actually finish it, and even a much smaller number who actually will then try to go through all the work and time and money of making it something that's worthwhile for other people to read and publish it. So for you, like, what was kind of the motivation to want to start reading, and then also, or to start writing this, and then also bringing it through this long journey to where we are now?
Yeah, the motivation to start writing, I mean, it really, the itch started with Dungeons and Dragons. Said the drunkest voice ever. Jesus, excuse me. Pardon my French. But yeah, no, I started writing based on D&D. I was playing it with my friends in the military. I was really like enthralled with that style. I'm enthralled with storytelling in general, like movies, TV shows, all that. And I had been reading for quite a bit. but usually make maybe 1 to 2 books a year. Like political thriller, the Terminalist series was really my first step into fiction. And then most of the other things was like a lot of self-help in my early 20s. And before that, it was just dropping out of college. So I was like, oh, let me read some Harvard Business Reviews on leadership and try and figure out how to, be something, and be a productive citizen in society. But it really started with Dungeons and Dragons, and it started with writing a backstory. The third part of the before actually is that's the oldest as far as like it touched something that I wrote. That is the backstory of a character I played in my first Dungeons and Dragons campaign ever.
And that's Alevist?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I started with that background. I had this like image in my head, and just like started becoming more and more like to the forefront of my mind, and it just took up so much space in my brain. I was like, wow, I'm really obsessed with this writing thing, this writing story. Okay, let me try DMing. DM'd. I did a campaign where I had 2 groups of 8. Again, we were in the military in the middle of nowhere in California.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of friends who I was trying to, like, after learning Dungeons and Dragons, I was like, you know, maybe I could try this DMing thing out a little bit. I like that. I like making my own rules. I don't like following all these other rules. And I also like being more loose. I think that rules are good guidelines, but I think we should like press against them every once in a while and like see how far you can go beyond them, because those limits are, I don't know, they're boring to me. It's like there's so much like cool stuff we miss out on with those rules. And so I had 2 groups of 8, and the goal was I had they were like teams. So I had 8 people draw cards. I'm sorry. This is, by the way, a long-winded answer.
No, you're good.
But I
you're
promise
good.
I'll get there. Because this is actually kind of just a part of it. This is definitely minute detail stuff. But I had 8 people, each team draw cards, and there was one person who was going to be like a double agent that would, I think in the 10th or 20th session, we were going to have them swap teams. And so the whole goal was for me to kind of, as a challenge as a DM, was to kind of work the narrative while giving the free storytelling, parameters to the players, to bring them together to eventually face off. And I used the world of Maitland. At the time, it wasn't called Maitland. Is it called Eralt or something? But yeah, I built the world out kind of through that. And then, of course, it stopped. They went on deployment. I had a hip surgery. And I was, after this is, now we're getting to it. So I had the hip surgery. There was the whole relationship I had leading up to in this period of time and before the military and getting into the military. And without getting into too much detail, there was just a moment 10 days after my surgery. I only know it was 10 days because my mom was with me for 10 days post-surgery. She had flown out to California and was with me at the hospital, picked me up. My buddy Burkhart, shout out. I don't know, he probably isn't going to watch this, but he picked me up and she got me, and she was with me for 10 days. She left. I'm sitting downstairs in my buddy Howie, my roommate Howie, who, by the way, got me this lightsaber mic. I have to shout him out too. I don't know if he'll ever watch it, but he got me the Darth Revan lightsaber, and I was sitting there in the chair by myself in my apartment. Roommate's gone, and I was talking to my, I guess, ex-partner at the time, and I just sort of had this moment of extreme loneliness that kind of came on, of just like, oh, okay, like this isn't gonna work. The relationship's over, actually, and I was just like very lonely in that time. And so I crushed myself out of my buddy's gamer chair, very comfortable, by the way, very comfortable gamer chair. And, waddled up the stairs, sat in my chair, opened up the Alavis Lightseeker, backstory, and then sort of just went for it. And I've always been a storyteller. I never was a writer until I decided to sit down that day and put my ass in the chair and start working. And then from there, I just never stopped. So it was storyteller first, I guess writer second. Yeah, that's kind of the best way I can explain my motivation to get into it. And I was just like compelled to work on the story.
Sure. Yeah. Now, like, I obviously had the privilege of being one of the advanced readers for this book, but there have been other people, and some of the reviews, even a few months early, have been coming out about this. And one of the things a lot of people will talk about is that the scope of this book, and reviews aside, I can just say this as a reader, like the scope of this book is massive. I think I described it to you as like, it's almost like starting A Song of Ice and Fire in the middle of a storm of sorts.
Yeah, I saw that.
There's so much that's going on to keep up with. For you, has that always been a part of the vision of this story? Of, I want this to be very large, very expansive. I want this to be a big story that readers are put right in the middle of. Or is that something that developed as you kind of worked through the story in your mind?
Yeah, when I first started writing, my biggest fear was lore dumps. My biggest fear was a big lore dump. I hated the idea of that. That said, when I read, I don't mind it so much. I like, I can get through that. But I never, my whole challenge was like, okay, I got this giant world. I know all of these details. I don't want to bog down people with what things are exactly. I don't want, and also the grounding aspect of my narrative, I wanted to be the characters and the emotions that the characters were going through. I didn't want the world is there, and we're exploring the world through the eyes of the characters. And I also, this is like a Steven Erickson, just like watching him speak about POV and perspective and the use of perspective. And then also my favorite stories, which has been Malazan and Elden Ring, which is a video game where you're thrown into a world, essentially a very brutal world. You're tarnished, that's all you know, and maidenless, which is hilarious. And and you're essentially put into this world that has all of this lore and all of this history. You're throwing all of these names. Now in that medium, it's probably a little bit more appropriate because you can kind of see things as you go, and you're like, oh, okay, that's what that is. I have an idea that this is a humanoid, or I have an idea that this is, whatever it is. But the more you kind of peel back the layers of Elden Ring and the lore that you get, you're like, oh wow, this world is insane. You have these demigods at war with each other, and this world is, and there's all these places that we don't ever see, but they're referred to constantly in little pieces and items that you pick up in the world. And that intentional narrative approach of being thrown into a world that is brutal, and you only navigate by just, I mean, honestly, Elden Ring was one of those things that you kind of look up. You're like, okay, I have to like look something up. I have to like figure out where I'm at. And then once you find out that, once you have that layer uncovered and peeled back, you can never get it back. You can never get that experience of like discovery again. You can, it's because I went back and I played. I'm like, wow, this just doesn't feel the same. Going back through it and knowing everything, like it's cool. It's cool to see all these little details now. But now that like wonderment and that excitement and that that sense of newness that comes with exploring something new is gone. And a part of the wonder of writing for me has been sort of discovering the world through the eyes of the characters more. And a part of that, of my DMing also, was discovering it through the eyes of the players and seeing how they felt about the world. So it was intentional in that that's the narrative, the type of narrative that I enjoy. I think that whether it's in book 1, book 2, or book 3 in this of 4, as far as my plans are go in this series, if people want to hang on, it's my hope that people find different places in the story. I'll very intentionally place sort of narrative lines or dialogue. My goal is to do it in a methodical way, and maybe it's not as I get better at writing. I imagine that I'll get smoother at it. My goal is that people will uncover all of the layers and the pieces that I'm putting down, and they'll go back, read again. Rereadability for me is also, I think, important. And they're like, I'm getting messages from people who are really picking up on a lot of the things that I'm putting down, and they're messaging me like, "Hey, I think it'd be really good for clarity to put this here." I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm on a sliding scale of, if I put that there, that tells I'm show don't tell. I'm telling." Like I'm showing you that there's something mysterious here. And as time goes on, I will show you that it's going to be there. It's just a matter of trust. And my whole thing was trust single reader first, by the way. I was just hoping to have one person like this book. My whole was like, trust one person who I maybe don't know who can read this book and maybe uncover these things as they go. And if they don't, it's a matter of trust of like, okay, eventually you're going to get there. And eventually I'm also going to get better at writing, That's a part of it for sure.
Yeah. Well, and this is probably a little late in the conversation to say this. We're almost 15 minutes in, and I probably should have asked you this earlier on, because there's more things about how you wrote this and sort of the way you crafted the world that I want to get to. But we should probably say, for people who either don't know about Mercy or haven't been following your journey along, do you mind giving a brief description about what the book is about and what sort of Alavis story is that you've crafted here? And
I'm very bad at elevator pitches, by the way. You have a former knight, that takes up the mantle. The timeline that you're catching him in this book, you're seeing him after he's already done the Paragon thing. He's done the Aragorn, like, go to the Black Gate and you save the world. And then you have another character who is distantly related to him through a friend, who had the similar things happen to him along his journey 30 some odd years later. And my whole goal was to connect these two people in one way or another. There's a lot of stories that I do like, a lot of inspiration in terms of, I love big, massive world like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. So those played a role. Like the big what if question I asked, this is actually the best elevator pitch I can come up with. The what if questions I asked, all related to Lord of the Rings, is what if Aragorn lost everything after the war for the One Ring? And what if Samwise had to kill Frodo in order to save Middle Earth? Those are the two questions I asked myself getting into my story in terms of what if. So there's a lot of exiles. There's a lot of like redemption arcs. That's the goal here. There's a lot of vengeance that plays in this story. And then it's just a lot of discovery. It's a lot of figuring out not who you are. I think that's kind of a simple way to go about it. Enduring suffering and perseverance, even though we don't exactly know what's next. Those are the big things that I dealt with in terms of my writing here.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. That's I think helpful to just give some context for what we're talking about, for people who haven't read it. I do know for me, because like I mentioned this before we hit record, but like it seems like everybody's got a book in mind, or there's tons of different self-published books out there, and it's difficult to stand out from the crowd because there is just so many people, and that's not a bad thing necessarily that there are all these different options. But the thing that really made my ears perk up and go like, oh, that's interesting, was when a few months ago you first gave, or at least when I first heard that elevator pitch of Aragorn losing everything, where do you go from there? It's like, oh, like that's interesting. I want to see what he does there. So you mentioned a few minutes ago about Elden Ring and sort of, I suck at video games in general. So I've played like maybe several hours of Elden Ring, and I get killed by like the village guards every time. I think if I devoted more time to it, I think I'd get a lot more out of the world, but I'm at least marginally familiar with it. And one of the things that I find interesting about Elden Ring is that there's a sense in the game of both like perseverance being an element to the story, but that also being built into the gameplay as well. It's very easy to die. There's a lot of things that can kill you very quickly. And like we talked about, this book, in terms of how it's written and how it's structured, there's a certain element to it that I think a lot of readers, I think some people will get through it just fine, but I think some readers will find it challenging. Speaking personally, there were parts of it that I found challenging to work through. And okay, what is what's Chance getting at here? Is that something that's intentional? And what's sort of your thought about was it intentional in making the reading experience a bit of a challenge in addition to the story about persevering through difficult things?
Yeah. It's intentional in the way that the world building was intentional in how you discover it. So the same narrative structure we were talking about with Elden Ring earlier, and what you were just mentioning now, and how it's tied into the player, and how, like in this instance, we'll refer to the player as the reader. Yes, because I sort of that may be a subconscious choice that I made, because there's this whole concept in Elden Ring of you are the player, suffering and enduring. And again, you don't necessarily know why unless you uncover pieces of the world. And then you fight Margit, I think is the first fight. And you die 1,000 times. And you're like, wow, I need to go get stronger. I need to like learn something. And you go back, you hunt down some runes, you get stronger, build up your character, find a better weapon, and then you go back, you fight Margit, you win. And then you progress into the castle, and then you either ask this guy to open the gate, or you go and do a jump puzzle really quick. And then if you open the gate, you run through, you immediately get shot 500 times and you die again. And you kind of, so the intention of making the reader a part of the storytelling process was there. I know that there's always different kinds of readers, and there's different kind of players, the gamers as well, like people who play, and there are people who are going to have an easier time than others just naturally. I was not one of those people that had an easy time in Elden Ring, by the way. But I think the the more you endure and the better you get and the stronger your character gets, the more enjoyment I think you get out of a story in general. I think you become more invested that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think if I could have my readers get invested through like, maybe I don't necessarily know what's going on here, which was my experience with Malazan. But I'm going to go through these beats and I'm going to see what happens as the story unfolds. And I'm just going to trust that Steven Erikson in this instance is going to get me there. Yeah. So I think it was sort of like a unintentional, intentional consequence of just the things that I enjoy coming and tying into the story. But yeah, I think the enduring and the aspects of suffering and persevering were things that were on the top of my head as I wrote, for sure.
Had you read Berserk at the time of writing this?
No, which is funny because I had written the second book and then I started picking up Berserk, and saying Eclipse isn't a spoiler, right? That's just like saying that exists isn't a spoiler. Okay. Once I read that, and you could actually probably go on my channel and find the conversation I was having with everybody who was watching the video and myself, I guess, where I am talking about Guts' story, I think post Eclipse, and just I don't want to get into spoilers. So I started realizing just how much influence Berserk had on Elden Ring in a lot of ways, because I think Miyazaki was a big Elden Ring or Berserk fan, which you see in the game. And I knew that. I had never read Berserk before. And then I read Berserk and I was like, wow, so tertiarily it had influenced me without me knowing.
Yep.
I think in a lot of ways.
Well, and why I ask is because, Berserk it's hard to recommend. And I don't even know if I do necessarily because of that. It is something that I think is it will only work for a certain subset of people. And to be perfectly honest, I'm not even terribly convinced that it works all the time for me. I haven't finished it, not even close by this point. I think I'm third of the way through it. But one of the things, just in terms of like tying craft with the message of your story, like that Berserk does, is that like the story, in terms of what Kentaro Miura is trying to communicate in the story, like it actually does not work if it's not as R-rated, R+ rated as it is, because a lot of it, and it's a lot of what we've been talking about here with Guts' journey about extreme suffering from literally page 1. With Guts' journey, like you actually don't connect with it in the same way or understand it in the same way if he pulls his punches, if he tones it down. But because it's so long, because there are things that are, as horrific as there are in that story, it ties in with the theme of what Guts has to endure as well. And especially and that's something that's especially challenging to do in something that is so visual as a manga. Whereas with something like a novel, maybe you're able to tone down just quite how extreme or disturbing some of the things, whether they're human violence or the demonic things that he has to face in the story.
Yeah.
So
I find that I didn't want to pull punches. There were times where that Alavis, I don't want to spoil. I mean, it's early on, but still, I think it's kind of like a cool thing to go through for the first time. The beginning, and there was a scene I wrote where I faded to black and just like went to the next chapter, and then I went back. Do you know the scene I'm talking about? Or just without getting, yeah. And then I went back and I was like, okay, no, I have to write that scene. And I stay away from sexual violence, but just I guess in the violence in the early part of the book, it was necessary, and what it uncovered for me doing, what it opened up, was so much more that if I hadn't done that, I don't think the book would have ended as well as I believe it did. And then let alone the story in book 2 and how it wraps up the first arc of the story. I think that pulling punches can affect the quality of the story, and just like trusting and not babying the reader like it is an adult novel.
Yeah.
I think it's important to just be like, all right, you're in the situation, you're here, and that's that. And it's funny because the way I treat like sex is fade to black, because I'm like, if it's not the way that between the beginning of book one and the end of book one, like the way that the violence happened is very important. And you find out why later. And I don't know if I could have done that narratively with a sex scene or anything like that. I just don't.
Yeah,
I just,
yeah.
Could I explore that for myself maybe and work on it and see if it uncovers anything? Maybe. And I'm sure it would. Usually I think there has to be a lot of intention behind something, but it's just also just not once you pigeonhole yourself into that in your story, it can put you in a box, and I didn't want to really be in a box. I guess I kind of wanted
For
to
sure.
be outside of the box.
So on that of like being outside of a box, like I'll say this, like this is, I don't know if I have a hard time with all the fantasy labels and the way things, but I think you could very easily call this an epic fantasy. I think maybe even high fantasy would fit the bill as well.
Yeah.
And with you talked about how there's you try to avoid info dumps. And so it's sort of, I want the reader to experience this as the characters are going through the story. And for some readers, like that's not going to work for everyone. Some people so take the things that you've compared it to. Malazan. Another thing that comes to mind that I know we're both fans of is the Book of the New Sun by Gene Wolfe. And there are things in that very early on people will bounce off of because they're either confused or they want more clarity about what's going on. So that's not going to work for everyone in terms of the style of it. The reception that I've seen for the book so far with the early readers has been very much positive, but there have been some people who figure that this doesn't quite work for them.
Yeah.
As the author, how's that been seeing some of the early viewers and just how it's resonated with some people, and then for some people it's not been quite what they were looking for?
Yeah, I think I'm actually super grateful that I think those reviews going up and people seeing that will help me find the audience a little bit better. And like, I would never want somebody to pick up a story that I don't think that they're going to enjoy. And my hope is that everybody that does pick up the story would enjoy it. But of course, that doesn't happen. Or at least if they do, maybe they pick something out of it that they did enjoy and that it just particularly wasn't working for them, which is also fine. I think it's been an interesting experience. I think early on, the first time you see it, you're like, oh man, because you get a lot of feedback along the way. I've gotten a lot of feedback from readers along the way, and a part of me was like, oh, okay, I need more critical people. I think in my corner, and I had a lot, but also, it's never perfect. And then the first time somebody reads through it, and then they read through it again, like they're going to pick up those things that you put down. And be, okay, I get it now, because now they're going back and they're rereading it already, and then you're getting feedback off of that. And so it's like, oh, okay, you're not getting exactly what you need. But it's been an interesting experience, to say the least. I think everybody's been pretty kind, at least even people who didn't, like, the book didn't necessarily work for them. I think everybody has been kind and honest, and I think that honesty is big in terms of finding the people who would like the story. And I mean, I know they exist, obviously, which I'm grateful for, and I'd love to, my hope is that when the second installment comes out and word on that goes around, that the people who maybe didn't finish the first book or didn't enjoy it as much, or like enjoyed it just enough to read the second one, that the second one really lands for them. That would be the hope, but you never know.
Yeah. Well, I'll speak for my own personal experience of the book. So, like dense stuff that's really heavy to get into sometimes can be a real challenge for me. I mentioned there were parts of this book that were a challenge, and we'll go back to Book of the New Sun for a second. It took me about halfway through book 3 before I figured out whether or not the series was even going to be for me or whether I would like it. And now it's a favorite of mine. But it took that deep into the series before it finally clicked, and I was like, okay, I think I get it now. And the other series that I've compared Mercy to has been the Second Apocalypse books by R. Scott Baker. which I haven't read Malazan yet, but my understanding is that there's a similar stylistic element there. And with Second Apocalypse, you're kind of thrown into the deep end. There's been hundreds of years of history, if not thousands, before the story begins. And these characters have all lived lives before page one, and you just need to pick it up as you go along. And it took me about halfway through the darkness that comes before I really felt like I had my footing in that world. And it was similar with this book as well. So with this being like a deliberate stylistic choice on your part, do you have anything that you would want to share or would be interested in sharing with readers who maybe would be nervous about getting to something, or if they're intimidated by the thought of like, man, a fantasy world that, your hand isn't held through this, like you kind of sink or swim. So whether it's lore background or just words of encouragement, do you have thoughts for readers who might be intimidated by it?
It's funny because the words come at the end of the first book, the archivist, in terms of like what is worth receiving, I guess, if we didn't work or we didn't endure to get it, if it was given to us. I wrote an essay that I initially was going to put in the book that I chose to pull, that I have it free up on my Patreon, that'll be on the internet forever. That I kind of dive into the themes a little bit. And I think that's why I decided to pull it from the book. It just was like too heavy handed in terms of what I'm trying to gather. And then at the time I didn't really explore perseverance because I sort of wanted that to be a hidden, I wanted that to be a hidden part of the experience because it is in Elden Ring. But then I decided to explore that in conversation in the essay. And my message would be, if at the end of the road, I will patch you up. That's what I put in that essay. It's like, we may get cut along the way. We may bleed a little bit. I bled a little bit, I'll say that as like one of those weird artsy things to say, in writing the story. My heart bled a little bit, and I haven't even fully been patched up myself. I haven't fully patched myself up yet because I'm still working through the story. I still have the second book to revise and edit and go through with my developmental editor, my copy editor. I still need to bleed a lot in that book. But I also need to bleed in the third and the fourth book. I need to get through those arcs because it's this weird feeling. I know what's going to happen at the end of this series, and the catharsis that I feel just like picturing it in my mind. And that's without even knowing how it's necessarily going to be executed just yet, because I am a discovery writer. I think it's, I have this picture in my mind, and I just know that what I'm going to get out of it as a storyteller, the story that I want to read, is going to be there at the end of this. And so will I. And hopefully so will people who pick the book one up and decide that they want to continue with the series, and they will be patched up at the end of the road. That's the goal. I am not one of those, like, I do not typically fall on the spectrum of like nihilism. I have not read The Darkness That Comes Before. I actually intend to. I love the idea of the story of how different it is from my thinking. I felt the same way about Malazan going into those books. At the end of the second book is where it landed for me. Book of the New Sun, also a giant influence of mine in some ways. And by the way, I don't ever want to claim to be probably 10% of the writer that Gene Wolfe or Steven Erikson are, let alone all the writers that have written books before me. But yeah, I will patch you up. And that's this. It's a weird trust thing, I'm trusting the reader. I'm hoping that I'm also being trusted. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's actually kind of leads me to my next thought here, because you're asking what you said there, both in how the world is constructed and sort of the things that are left ambiguous, and things that you need to discover along the way, is you are asking, like I said, the readers to trust you. And this is not, for what it's worth, this is not a terribly short novel. I think in paperback, this copy is just over 500 pages. And it's the start of a 4-book series, like you've talked about. And then with the steep learning curve, that is a lot of trust that the reader has to put in the story, and that this is all going to go somewhere, and as a first-time author, trusting that this is all going to come together well by the end of it, which, to be perfectly frank, is it's a big ask for a reader, and especially for an author that maybe they haven't read before. So with that, is there anything about that thinking back on, since we've talked about, some people this really works for and other people find it more challenging, having thought about that at all, is there anything with that you would change, or is this exactly how you want it?
I've thought about that since seeing the feedback and people that are bouncing off of it. And the truth is, I would be open to criticism of looking at it, and if there was a better way to execute it as I become a better writer, yes. But no, I think that going back. By the way, I don't know if you asked me a yes or no question, but I think going back, I would. I'm happy with the choices that I made, and I think when I first set out to write, my first epic fantasy was Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn by Tad Williams. And this is over a 20-year-old book at that time. At the time I read it, I think it's older than that significantly. I think it's almost 30 some odd. I think it's over 30 years old.
Sure.
When I, as a debut author, there's a lot of advice that very successful authors give, including Sanderson and Martin, of don't start with the big stories, start with the short stories, start with this, start with that. And I'm like, yeah, I could do that. But if I write something now and I get the craft good enough, the goal would be to be, as polished as it can be. Like you mentioned actually in your review, the quote of like bringing fiery passion to the story. And like I know I'm a storyteller, and I know my writing is only going to get better. But I definitely needed the professional guidance to get there. In 20 years, looking back, I may, by the way, feel totally different in 20 years. But my goal was in 20 years that the book has, and by then the story would have been complete and enough people hopefully would have read it that it keeps carrying on. I wanted to write something that had legs, and an infinite lifespan, something that could kind of just go on, and then I could look back on and be proud I did it, and then B, I can go back and read it and get something new out of it, maybe in 20 years, just like I have with some of my favorite stories, some of my favorite movies, some of my favorite books. Or I guess not so much books, but definitely favorite movies and TV shows, because I haven't really reread as much, if at all. So I just know that I want something that has longevity, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe it fizzles out. I don't know. The intention is to write something that in 20 years, people talk about, like they talk about Star Wars. That was genuinely, that's like a part of it. Like I want the world to be uncovered, one step at a time. I want people to have theories about, the 20,000 years ago, like what happened in the world, Some of that is alive in my head, not all of it. I have to admit, most of it is there. There's like seas of things. I actually did a whole like lore document about like how did Maitland and how did it come to be? And the question, the age-old question that we all ask ourselves, how did the world start? Where did we come from? Where did it come from? I kind of wrote a whole like odyssey of not a whole odyssey. It's like 4,000 words that exists on my drive somewhere. That hopefully one day may see the light of day. Maybe not. I know that there's stories that I want to explore in this world and in its history. And yeah, most of it's just fun for me. But looking back, I don't think that I would have done anything different right now. This is fresh, so you ask me this in 5 years, 10 years, that may change, but I hope not. I hope that I feel the same way.
It makes sense. I have a couple thoughts on that. One, the first, I guess I'd say is it's interesting. You said Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is kind of like the first of the big epic fantasies that you got into. And what's interesting about that, I haven't read Tad Williams yet. Got it right back there, but haven't read it yet. But my understanding is a lot of people say that Dragonbone Chair starts slow, and you really have to get into it, and you have to trust that Tad is going to take you somewhere with it. And the other part of that is that the last book in that trilogy, To Green Angel Tower, is one of the longest books ever published.
Massive.
It is a chunk of a book. My version is split into 2 volumes, which I think a lot of them are. So in some ways, I guess it shouldn't be terribly surprising, with that being one of your major influences as far as starting you into epic fantasy, that as a result, you're like, all right, well, I trusted Tad and could make through that as a reader. And I know lots of readers do that. And so, I want to do something similar here.
Yeah. No. Tad Williams hooked me with his prose and his writing. I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful. There are a lot of people who bounce off that story too, which I mean, just for his writing alone, it's worth sticking around. Let alone the narrative things that he's able to do. And there are things that I didn't pick up that were sort of revelations at the end of the third book that I was like, oh, now I need to go back and reread this. Now, obviously, we're in the perpetual TBR, endless TBR mode. But that is as far as books that I would like to reread first, I think the Book of the New Sun's in there because I think that's a little bit more achievable. And then Ted Williams because of what he does and the slow burn in the first book it's worth the drive in the first book alone because the first half very slow. I think it's like I think he's talked about this. It's like chapter 10 or something where you start to you're like, oh, now we're being thrust into this journey. And what just like had me sitting there hooked is maybe not knowing other epic fantasy and just being like, okay, this is how epic fantasy is. Let me dive in and see what this experience is like. Which if you look at my early drafts of Mercy, you do sort of see that. You sort of see that come out. There was a lot that I cut, a lot of drinking at bars that I cut. Thanks, Dave, for that. But yeah, I am a lot of drinking at bars, a lot of just like, head nods and winks and a bunch of BS that was just like prolonging it for no reason. Sure. Like, I know I'm doing something. I know I'm trying to create a slow burn, but maybe I just don't exactly know how to do that yet. So
sure.
Yeah. But yeah, Tad Williams definitely worth reading. And not that that's what we're discussing, but B, definitely, I guess if I had to really think about it, I knew he was an influence. I didn't exactly know how. And I think that this might be how. I think that this may be how it reared itself in my writing.
Well, with the rereadability factor, I mentioned to you before we went live that since getting this physical arc in the mail, I actually started rereading a couple of bits and kind of went through some areas. And there are things that, having reached the end of the book and having context and really just being steeped into the world for 500 pages, then going back and reading, I don't know if it's a prologue or if it's just the first few chapters or what, but basically the opening of the book. Now I have more context for what some of these things are and who some of these people are and who they'll become and what some of these world building elements are that people are talking about. It's like, oh, when I first read that, it's kind of like in one ear out the other because I have no context to hang it on. But having gotten to the end of the book, some things make a little bit more sense now. So I do think at least I haven't reread the whole thing, but at least for that amount, I definitely think there's an aspect to that comes across.
Yeah, that was definitely my goal. There's no way I could possibly, without boring readers with lore dumps, get all that information out to you. So it's like, where am I going to sprinkle this piece of info in? And then there's things that we're seeing in book one that we don't necessarily get payoff in the first book, but writing book 1 and 2 as a single arc, I don't want to spoil anything, but the goal is that the payoff that of all the things that were promised in book 1 happens in book 2. Like, I don't want to say anything because I don't want to keep it a surprise. Sure. But you look at I'm going to refer to the show Game of Thrones. You look at like the Hound versus the Mountain, that sort of thing that was promised, and everyone was like, "Oh, let's get it." And then the delivery. I mean, I don't know. At the end of that show, I don't want to really talk about, even though I brought it up. But there's this is where the Sanderson lectures come in, which was a part of my becoming a better writer journey, where you get promise, progress, and payoff. The first book is a lot of promise, progress, and then there's also this concept that Brandon talks about. I talk to him, I'm talking about him like he's a friend. Brandon Sanderson talks about where there's, okay, we're promising you this. This is still something I want you to think about, but I'm going to give you something else you didn't know that you maybe wanted or needed. And then we'll get to that other stuff later. And he talks about how difficult of a thing that is to do. And I think knowing how the second book ends and having written it already, I think that the execution of the second book will scratch the itch that people are looking for in book one.
Mm-hmm.
And you going back, by the way, super grateful you did that, because I think that's really cool. And actually Zachary Shea did something similar when he was like throwing theories at me, and he's like, here, what about this line and how that, maybe that means something. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, I can't really tell you. I don't know why you're you're about to read the second book, maybe. But yeah, it's very fun. I by the way, I love when people messaging me and chatting about aspects of the story, and I don't know, good and bad. I love all of it. I love just hearing what people are thinking in the moment, and maybe like, oh, this isn't really working for me. It's like, that's fine. For the most part, I really love hearing what people have to say.
Yeah, so you guys heard it here. Chance approves of review bombing. He wants it. He wants it. So everybody 1 star. So with the world, because the world building, it's like a tongue. World building is a big part of this book. Is there something? And I've never played D&D, but my impression of it is like, the R.A. Salvatore books, the D&D movies, this very like, quest with a group of people type of fantasy feeling. And I don't get that impression from this book. I never read it and was like, this feels like a D&D campaign that he wrote out.
Yeah.
So that might just be ignorance on my part, but is there a particular part of how the world was built and crafted by you that you're like particularly proud of, or like one element that you're like, I really like that you can tell us that maybe is a hook, but not a big spoiler?
That I can tell you. I actually do need to think of this. Is a good question, Sam, by the way. You're like the Chris Evans of BookTube right now.
Oh, well, thank you.
Let me think. Is there a world building hook that I'm most proud of? There's one that I can't say. So it's not a hook. That's like we're reeling in the line, man, I think the structure of what the tiers are, I think because of where that came from, it just kind of sort of came out of the blue for me. That is something that I'm incredibly proud of. And I can't necessarily, I guess, say what they are, but all we know early on in the story is that they are essences of demigods. And that's kind of like I guess if you're talking about in the opening, we learn that, like, you may not explicitly hear that, but I think it's sort of explicitly explained. If I can think back to the exact line, I think it's even in the very first scene. But even knowing that, it's not just demigods, it's artisans. It's why are they artisans? Oh, because they're the builders of Mightland, and well, where do they come from? It's like, okay, well, they were, sent from somewhere that I, can't say yet. There's just a lot of cool stuff in the pantheon, I'll call it, that I'm very proud of. And the tiers, I think, are included at the bottom rung of that. And then, I think that's where I have to draw the line.
Sure. So let's get a bit more clarity so that people can understand what we're talking about here. So for the tiers, is this like a liquid? Is it like a gem? What exactly like is a tier that the characters encounter? Yeah.
So tiers are like a gem, sort of like what is it? Book of the New Sun? Can we even say that yet? I don't even. That would be a spoiler for Book of the New Sun.
With the claw?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like halfway through book one.
Yeah.
Okay. Special gem that a character finds.
Yeah, it is imbued with, I'll say, the sacrifice that immortal demigods had to make in order to save the world. So there's something inside of them that was crafted with the purpose of saving the world. That's all I can say. But it is a gem. Physically, it is a gem. They are called tiers because typically the shape and the manner of dying of the artisans but yeah, because there are runestones in the world of Mercy's world universe, which also is partly inspired by one of my favorite games of all time, RuneScape, by the way. And I was like, man, how do I get lightsabers in which everyone's doing better, you know, with shard blades, and Ryan Cahill with his blades, and you know, I don't know. I was like, I gotta get into a fantasy world. I need to do it.
Sure.
And then that's where the vial actually of this is, again, I don't want to get too into the lore world building here, already like overwhelming people. But the I know you caught the Book of the New Sun, the vial inside of the in the middle of the blade. Yeah, that was definitely an inspiration from that too. Changing the weight of the swing. You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought that was a really cool. Actually, that one I'm kind of. I mean, it's totally, you know, stole that from from Gene Wolfe, but put my own spin on it and have it related to the magic system, relatively speaking.
Well, like Rockio's been ripping him off for years and has been successful. So just join the club of Christopher Rockio.
Yeah. And then, I'm so happy you turned me on to Book of the New Sun, by the way.
No, definitely. I told him when I got the opportunity to talk with him, I said, I'm thankful for your books, but like almost like on an equal level, I'm thankful for you like introducing me to Wolfe, because I heard the name but would have never picked him up without him being sort of the John the Baptist hype man for the series. So
yeah, exactly.
So and we won't talk about world building the whole time, but it is a big part of the book. I am wondering if you can talk at all about and help me out with this, because I'm bad with names. Is it the rains or the blight? What is this that the world experiences every like period or so?
Yeah, so it's always different things. The epochs of time in Mercy of Mightland, the world of Mercy, is there's different things that happen that will spur an epoch, kind of like, you know, the Great Flood sort of concept. You know, the Crimson Rains spawned this necrosis, this blight that was used as a weapon for a certain culture to sort of invade from somewhere that we don't necessarily, you know, we don't know anything about. It's a place no living person on Mightland, with the exception of people who maybe we meet later in the story, have really been. And even those that have, it's been a long time. So there's a lot that could have changed in the period of time that they've been around. But there's this whole other mysterious lineage, this mysterious race that comes over from Mercy. But we know nothing about Mercy. All we know is that these storms separate Mercy from Mightland, and that nobody has gone to Mercy and come back, or anybody who's sailed there, you never hear from again. It's just essentially a big part of the story. So the rains and the blight poisoned the water of Mightland, and that caused a massive, we'll call it a pandemic. And I don't know why I'm laughing after I said pandemic. And
trying to get us demonetized, Chance.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. And it forced a lot of people's hands, because they needed to figure out a way to stop the spread of this sickness. And it spurred a lot of innovation. It also ended up taking away a lot of the innovation of the epoch that passed, simply because of the sacrifices that needed to be made in order to rid the water supply, rid most water of the blight that came along.
Right.
And it's you can say it's, you know, the will of the gods that put it over, but like no one really knows. All we know is that it was a tool used, and it may not have been intentional. It may have been unintentional, but either way, it was used as a weapon, simply to essentially a bioweapon to bring a whole world to their knees in order to dominate it. Essentially, that was the goal, is that they wanted to come over and dominate the Mightland, these people from Mercy. But I can't say more than that, because I think at a certain point, that there may be a subversion of that in a way at some point. I don't exactly I can't exactly say if or how, but that's like all we really know is that in the beginning.
When we want people to buy the book, so we can't tell them everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's almost like, like a Elden Ring with maybe a bit of like the Last of Us type of thing. If we're going to keep with the video game comparisons, in terms of the infection that some people encounter there.
Yeah, the Scarlet Rot was definitely a big inspiration for the Crimson Blight. Like verbatim.
Sure, yeah. So let's talk about like some of the moving away from some of the world building, but some other parts of the writing here. With this being your first novel, and we've talked about how ambitious it is and how it was, it'll be a challenge for some readers, but I'm sure that also means that there were some really challenging things for you as an author with this being at least first published novel. So yeah, what were some of the things that you had to endure or work through, or things that were difficult, with this kind of being your first foray here?
Yeah. We don't know what we don't know. And there's a lot of that when you first start writing. For me, at least there was. It was countless hours of just research, videos, podcasts, books, trying to learn how to write. That was like the biggest part because I had not really been a writer. Growing up, I was not much even of a reader. I just love stories. And so there were a lot of hurdles along the way of, figuring out how to become a better writer. And the developmental editor, Dave Butler, who's also working with Christopher Rocchio, I think, on his he worked on with Disquiet Gods, and he's doing the finale. Finding him was the biggest, like in just doing research, was the biggest boon to the story in terms of just that. And I mean, and the copy editor, Gracie York over at the York Editing Guild. Those were two of the biggest leaps I think I made in my craft, came from them. If I hadn't had them, I would have been stuck for a while, and not knowing that I was stuck. I would have just kind of like went for it, and I would have fell flat on my face, 100%. So getting good at the craft, or not. I'm not. By the way, I don't want to say that I am. I like to think that I have a decent grasp of at least how to construct a story at this point.
Yeah.
So that part was fine. That sort of came naturally, but the writing itself was definitely the hardest part for me. And then, which, by the way, all the resources that are out there, it's like there's so many tools, so many resources that are available. Now we have internet so that we can just we can search for, somebody who freelance editors, as an example, who work with traditionally published authors.
Yeah.
There was a hard part of wanting to query in the beginning. And I just found like a handful of agents who represent like big books, big epic fantasies. And, you query them and you either don't get a response or you get a no. And then it was just like deciding, okay, at some point I have to learn how to become a better writer. And if you get traditionally published, you work with these editors, and sometimes it's the agent themselves who will go through and deconstruct your story and reconstruct your story with you. I didn't have any of those tools, so I had to pay for it. So, you have to work up funds to do that. You have to work to do that. Stephen Pressfield, by the way, is a great resource for anybody struggling with artistic blocks of any kind, resistance. His nonfiction books of just like putting your ass where your heart wants to be, and hurdling resistance, or like jamming your head into the wall, which I talk about in my essay. That sort of stuff is like sitting at the keyboard and sitting at the computer and actually writing when you're drafting is hard. It's like super hard. You're not always going to be hit with inspiration, but I've heard this talked about so many times, but it's like working out. Like you have to go to the gym and you have to exercise, and then you're going to see changes. You're going to see things happen. So if I'm not sitting down at the computer and I'm not writing, how am I going to get better at writing? I just have to be okay sucking.
It's like almost an act of faith, in that.
Yeah, exactly. It is very much, it's just like kind of sort of having faith. Like I'm not good at this right now, but I think I'm going to get there. I have enough. I have faith that, with my work ethic, I'll uncover the things that I need to uncover as I go. So I'm just going to keep going. And so every day I'd sit down, and there were so many times, especially early on, I think I overcame this specific hurdle mostly, and I'm sure I'll experience it as I go into book 3 here soon. Again, I was like, oh man, why am I even doing this? And I experienced it in book 1. I experienced it in book 2. It's like, oh man, I suck. Like, people are going to read this. They're going to tell me how much I suck. It's just like, why am I doing this to myself? Like, why am I torturing myself? But it's a compulsion. Like, it's a weird sort of like need to do it that I had to sort of uncover again as I went. But the hard part is definitely sitting in the chair and writing, and then getting good at it. Is that even the right terminology?
Yeah.
Getting better at it.
When I'm sure for anyone, you know, and I want to talk about a few things that are kind of maybe clues as to some of where this story comes from on a personal note. I'm sure for any author who's finished a book and published a book, I'm sure it's comes from a place within their heart, at least to some extent. But especially with this being your first novel, maybe there's some amount of a clue to that here at the beginning of the book, which is you have a dedication here at the beginning, and it just says, for you, Pops, and then July 20th, 2013. If you wouldn't mind, would you mind sharing a little bit about maybe what that means, and if at all that has anything to do with this book?
Yeah. It has to do with my ability to endure writing it, for sure. So my father passed away. It'll be 12 years we're coming up on here when the release of the book, that he passed away. And my whole life, I was 19. I was 2 days into being 19 years old when he had passed. But my whole life I hadn't known him. He had suffered with heart disease since he had been 19. And he passed away at 69. And I just saw him endure for his family since I was a kid. I saw him go through so much physical pain, so much physical and emotional distress, and needing to be taken care of, and being okay needing to be taken care of, and just all of those obstacles just to be kind of a rock in a family. And my mom also deserves credit for that too, because she absolutely 100% was as well. And when he passed away, I had to sort of, you're 19 years old, you have to like grow up a little bit. And I didn't want to, and that's just the truth of it. But he gave me enough guidance in those first 19 years, in terms of just enduring. And I don't want to use the word suffering, but it's true. There definitely was suffering there. He had a stroke when I was 7 or 8. And I saw him endure there. I saw him be strong in a moment of incredible weakness. And we walk into the house. He can't make a sentence. He's struggling to speak. I mean, he's standing in the kitchen in his underwear. And at the time I'm a kid, I laugh. My mom laughs. She comes up the stairs, and she calls the ambulance. They come. They start testing him, and then my not to shout out my sister, we were kids. It's okay that, I cried too, but she was crying, and I look at her and I look at my dad in the living room, and he looks at me and he goes, "Don't worry, everything's going to be all right." I heard it clear as day. He says, "Don't worry, everything's going to be all right." And then I started breaking down, bawling. I was like, okay, he's the rock. He can handle it. Like I can cry now. I didn't know. I thought that I was supposed to be the strong one there, whatever that means, as an 8-year-old kid. And yeah, that just like, it's stuck. Those moments in life stuck with me. And when it comes to writing this book, enduring and it's me sitting in a chair, writing on a computer is nothing compared to what my father had to do in order to, essentially survive for his family. And provide whatever it was that he was doing at the time. And so, yeah, I think that plays such a big role in the story and in the narrative, just in accidentally. And then, I mean, there's a ton of father-son, mentor-mentee stuff that's explored in the first book. At least at the extent of like, we get Viala and Salazmir, and we have early on, we have Marin and Eravane. And, I think those characters, every single character in this book has a piece of me. And there are definitely some that have pieces of my father. And in the second book, we meet one that has pieces of my mother. and I can't wait to actually talk about that because that's going to be so funny. But yeah, my father definitely played a big role in my ability to tell story and my appreciation for story through the movies that he showed me growing up, all the things that he enjoyed. Sitting down and watching movies is one of the things that we were able to constantly do without question. And yeah, it plays a big role in Mercy for sure.
Well, because there's at the end of the book, well, there's a couple things here. One is, and let me just flip to this here, but you've got, let me see if I can find this here. I may cut some of this out.
You're good. No, don't worry about it. Yeah, it's all right. Don't go back and edit. Just, do it. I believe in you.
Durfee edit, right?
Exactly. Right. Exactly. Durfee edit.
We'll do it live.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Well, I'm not finding it here in the acknowledgments. I should have noted it specifically. But there's a bit where you talked about just the things you're thankful for and the people you're thankful for. And one of the things that you said that you're thankful for was that you're thankful for loneliness and for the time that you've had to deal with that and that you've had to wrestle with that. And then the book itself ends, even after the glossary, after all of that, there's just a poem here at the back, which as far as I can tell, doesn't appear to be anything in world or some like secret hidden gem. But if you'll indulge me for a moment, it just says, it's not very long. It says, life is easy. It claws at you. It slams its foot down on you. It rakes for your knees, but it does not happen to you. Life is easy. It bites at your throat. It aims for your heart. It'll rip it out of your chest, but it does not burden you. Life is easy. It'll scold you, tell you how enough you aren't, burn you in places too hot, freeze you in places too cold. It'll take everything from you, but leave the world at your feet. Life is easy. Let it claw, slam, let it rake, and let it bite. Let it have your heart. Give it everything. Give it all you have. Give life the last piece of yourself. In return, you get to create life, art, love, happiness. Life is easy. Let it burn, so that you may heal over with new skin, and love with all of you, even the devil inside. Because life is too hard to hold on to that darkest piece of yourself. Give that too, and maybe then life will become easy. And if you don't mind me asking, this maybe ties into everything else that we've been talking about here in the last few minutes, but and maybe it's a spoiler to have read that, but
No,
why is that there at the back of the book?
Yeah, it is contemporary, by the way. It's not like in world. It was independent publishing offers you the opportunity to put whatever you want. And I chose to do that. I wrote that one night. I came across a poem. Someone was talking about, nobody said life is easy. And I wrote that as sort of a play on that. And I was like, okay, and believe it or not, that's as close to a first draft as a poem could probably be before it gets published in a book. But that I actually started storytelling a lot with songwriting. By the way, like several years ago, and my cousin's really good at it, so much better than me. but the poem was put in there because I think it explores the themes appropriately in terms of perseverance and suffering, and what life throws at us. And perseverance, I think, and suffering are two opposites in the same box. They're both perspectives, and one is a positive outlook, one is a negative outlook. Suffering is an outlook of, okay, I'm suffering. I'm going to I can live inside of my suffering, or I can shift my perspective and I can look at perseverance, and I can look at like taking a step forward. In my essay, I refer to jamming my head against the wall, and just hoping that the wall will change from brick to cloth, or a drapery, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know how many walls are made of drapery, but
well, they are in Book of the New Sun.
Yeah. So I put it in there because I think it appropriately explores the themes that I was exploring in my essay, without being so on the nose, if that makes sense. Which I think it may actually, now that you read it. By the way, you reading it back to me is the first time I've heard it read back to me, and I'm grateful you did that, because that was really, it was sort of cathartic for me to hear you do that, by the way, in the moment. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And referring to the loneliness that I refer to in the acknowledgements, it's sort of associated, with that. It's if I hadn't been, which I referred to in the start of this conversation, if I hadn't been alone, I would never have decided to get up and sit in the chair.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say alone, I was like really, really alone. Like my mom
Mm-hmm.
had just left, and she'd gone back to the East Coast, and at the time I was on the West Coast, and yeah, it was truly alone. And in that, I was able to find the seat. I was able to find my hands on the keyboard, and I was able to write. So I have to thank it, because if I didn't, I feel like I wouldn't be doing justice. My acknowledgments, by the way, are probably annoyingly long, which I think is another, subject. That's where independent publishing comes in. People get to the acknowledgments, they're like, wow, he was given too much free reign here.
No, I read through the whole thing, and well, let me just say, this is my favorite acknowledgments that I've ever read, mainly because, well, look at that right there. There's a very
who's in there?
kind shout out right there on the acknowledgments.
I should have circled that for you. I should have circled it.
Well, there's and I don't know if it also says for early readers, and there's a Sam listed there. I don't know if that's me, but I was gonna say, if it's not me counted twice, I'll believe it for myself.
That's you counted twice. Yeah. You were somebody who gave me a lot of feedback. Of a good feedback that's sort of, I try to take it. If we cut to the big world building stuff that was thrown in people's faces, that was the feedback you gave. I did make changes based off of that, like you and NA. Both gave me a lot of help with that early prologue, the before, that I think improved the story. So I had to thank you guys. I'm super grateful that you guys took the time to read it and in the state that it was in, and give me the feedback. I was super grateful. So yeah, definitely. Yeah. Worth giving you an acknowledgement.
Well, you're very kind. I am teasing you, but you are very kind. I appreciate that. It's interesting just on what you're talking about with like loneliness and suffering. Like I mentioned this, not to keep going back to when I got the chance to talk to Christopher Accio, but we talked about this briefly. I kind of feel like I don't know, maybe a hypocrite in some ways, talking about suffering where I live in the 21st century in an air-conditioned home with a computer and a car and a wife and a kid. So it's like, who am I to talk about that? But I do think it is fair to say that like everybody's suffering is their own. And for people interested in reading this book, it's not like torture porn. It's not the most graphic thing you'll ever read, but not by a long shot. But I do think that just speaking as a reader, I do think it does come across that a lot of the heavier things that the characters have to bear through or have to endure, that at least the emotionality of that, the emotion side of it, and what they're feeling and experiencing, that it came from a personal place.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have something to speak to with that, you can. Otherwise, it's just an observation as well on that.
Yeah, I by no means think that the suffering I've experienced in my life is like greater than or less than somebody else's. I do know that there are people who have suffered far greater than I have.
Yeah.
And still walk the earth. And so when it came to the emotionality of writing my characters and sort of there's a lot of self-loathing from a lot of them. There's a lot of shame. I think shame is a big thing to explore. I think we all have experienced it, usually as children, and we carry a lot of shame with us in certain aspects of our life. Everybody experiences them in different ways for different reasons. And when I was exploring these things, it sort of just came out as the character's voice. It wasn't something that I necessarily, certainly these aren't things that I dealt with in my life. Which I think one of the reasons why fantasy is so cool, fantasy sci-fi are both so cool, is you can just kind of explore things at such a wild level, because there are things that you can throw at characters to endure and to deal with that we never ever hopefully will ever have to deal with, in terms of, I don't know if dragons will be around. Have you seen Reign of Fire with Matthew McConaughey and Christian Bale? But it's there are a lot of things that we deal with, we suffer, we shame ourselves, and we come out the other side. Either we create a new rule for ourselves, a new agreement of, okay, this is how I'm going to be in the world now because I experienced shame. Or I'm not going to let that story how I live on. I'm not going to let that shame or let that suffering or let that enduring story the rest of my life. And often I have lived in my own suffering, which I again talk about in my essay, and which goes back to how I don't treat it as perseverance. I did treat it as suffering. And you get so far in that rabbit hole, and you realize, like, wow, I am a sorry sack. Like, I need to stop being this way. I need to choose to be a different way. I need to choose to look at it differently, or I'm going to just keep going down this path, and I'm not going to come out of the other side. Part of that is the grief with my father. There were things that I didn't know about. There was some resentment that was built up there when I was younger, because he was sick most of my life. And that wasn't something that was apparent in my conscious for me growing up. It just wasn't. And then I sat down and I wrote a letter to my dad after he passed away. And I was like, oh, I discover now that I resented him, and I had to forgive myself for doing that, because it's like so easy to hold that over your head and live into that and be like, wow, that is disgusting that I did that. But I was young. I had no idea. I had no idea. And then my career in the Navy, there was trying to get a specific job and then failing to do so, and choosing to go another way just because things weren't holding up the way that I wanted them to, really and choosing to not persevere, and instead not choosing the route of persevering through suffering, and instead choosing the easy way. And then ultimately that spins around, and you're like, oh, well, now I'm living in my suffering because I made that choice, and I'm beating myself up over making that choice instead of moving on and figuring out the rest of life. And it's so easy to do that. It's so easy to live in that limbo. So with a lot of the characters and their emotionality, for the things that have happened in their lives, I wanted to explore. I didn't want, there in earlier drafts, I definitely explored it too much, but I wanted to explore, how that resonates in their day to day. Does it show for all of them? Is it something that the other characters can see? Do they see this person's self-loathing? And if they don't, what's going on inside of the character's head, and then how they're being perceived, and like, what's the contrast between those two things, or what are the similarities? And it maybe it speaks to me a little bit of how much the, shame and self-loathing lives inside of some of these characters' heads. But that emotionality sort of just came natural to me in a weird way. And I think that's where a lot of the catharsis I got as a writer comes in, is through just going in those characters' heads and exploring those emotions and seeing how they react to different things that have happened in their lives.
For the suffering in your life that we've been discussing here for the last few minutes, and then also that, I think we said at the beginning, Alavist loses everything, so I don't think that's too much of a spoiler to say.
It's on the back of the book too.
On.
Yeah.
So for the suffering that he endures, what is it for both you and for him that you think keeps driving him forward, choosing to embrace it, choosing to sort of lean into it? Is it a divine mandate? Is it simply that there's no other option other than to become bitter and resentful? Is it looking out for other people? What is it that makes for him, but also I would say for you as an author, how did that play in as far as as far as that endurance goes?
I think it's incredibly dynamic. I think it's never just one thing, especially with Alavist, because there's a gap between when we see him in the beginning and when we find him later.
Yeah. That surprised me.
Yeah. And in that time, inside of that gap, there was a lot of time that he spent that you sort of maybe get a line here or there where he talks about it. He doesn't chat about it often, because why are you going to talk about something that happened, 17 years ago for too long in your head to yourself, which we may do, by the way, which we're off to do. But it's usually just a passing thought, and then you feel that shame inside of yourself, and then you let it go. But there definitely are points in his life where he made choices to live into a suffering that we just don't really see. And there are ways out that he just chooses to not take because there's something pulling him on. And the Alavis we meet in the very, very beginning is very different from the Alavis we meet, at least I think so, later in the book. But the one through line is his desire to sort of uncover. He does stand for good about as much as a person can. There is, like you were talking about, a divine mandate. His morals and his, which by the way are, I guess we do see kind of uncovered as like maybe not perfect, but earlier Alavis, that would never have been, those things would never have been a thought. And I guess we could talk offline after if we're going to get into spoilers. I mean, I don't care. We can get it if you wanted to. We can. I just want people to be warned.
Yeah.
But yeah, there are some things that he is mandated to protect. And you see that objectively with the item that he has, that he feels now obligated to, return to its home, or where he perceives its home. And then you have these sort of things that come up along the way. And also you got to think maybe he's not aware of the things that keep him going so much. You think there's what he thinks keeps him going, and then there's what actually is keeping him going. What he thinks is keeping him going is his drive for blood, right? I mean, there's something that he really needs. He's waiting for it, right? He's being pretty patient. He's been patient, and he's been slowly uncovering, where can he find these people that wronged him, that took these things from him? Who are they? And then there are things that populate for him that now he's sort of compelled to protect, and he doesn't necessarily know that. He doesn't necessarily see that as it is. He sees it as a means to an end. He's like, I got to do this because it's just going to help me. It's like, yeah, I mean, is it? Do we know if it is? Are we sure? And maybe, but maybe there's also another reason as to why you're doing it. Maybe there's something there that we just haven't really seen yet, because if we're seeing it through his eyes, or the eyes of the people that know who he is, and in his celebrity, especially the people closest to him, they saw a side of him they never thought they'd see, which is what we're seeing. The most exploration we get from Alavist is later in the book, and it's Aragorn if he lost everything.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. Aragorn actually might be a better paragon in that circumstance, but I like to think that even who he is in Lord of the Rings would be tested thoroughly if the things that happened to Alavist happened to him.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, kind of getting to the end of our discussion here. I have a few, I'd say rapid fire, but these might not be very rapid, but a few final concluding questions for you here. The first is, and this pertains specifically to Mercy, but what's something that you saw that was missing in sci-fi fantasy that you're hoping to add, whether it's to the conversation or just a different type of book? What's something that you saw lacking that you want to help provide with this book?
I think there's a lot of ambition when it comes to writing fantasy and sci-fi. I think we typically think inside of these boxes in terms of what needs to be delivered. I think taking big swings and taking risks with your writing is important, and challenging yourself. And I hope to do that as I get further in my career as a writer. So I would love to bring that to the genre. It's not that anything was missing. I think there's oftentimes we're scared to put ourselves out there, and me putting the story out there in the way that in the way that it's told, the narrative structure, I think hopefully will story, anybody out there who's scared to kind of put their heart on page to just do it. It's kind of like a subtle hope of mine for sure. Otherwise, we do get introduced to Gunhilder early in the book, that, maybe doesn't work. And I think there's some cool things that we can explore in fantasy. It has been done. There's some things that I'm going to play with in regards to, I don't want to say too much. I'll tell you offline. That I want to play with in the genre that I think I can put a spin on. And so far from my research, I haven't found these things in stories and fantasy in these ways. So I'm hoping that there are some new fun explorations of dark, twisted things that can happen, that we can play on and we can spin on.
Yeah, well, great answer. What's to hit the next one? What's a fantasy or science fiction book that you've read, whether it's in the last couple of years here, that meant a lot to you, that you see very much underrepresented or you think is underrated, that you'd like to recommend for everyone?
I'd say Book of the New Sun,
Hmm.
but I think you guys are starting to bring that puppy to the mainstream sphere on
Oh, we're
BookTube.
trying.
I think The Failures I read recently, which now Mike's book reviews is bringing to the forefront. I think that was like a really top-notch book for me in terms of just like that world building was absolutely fascinating for me in a similar way.
Interrupt it. I'll say like this for the record, I read about the first 25% of The Failures, and that was last year, and bounced off of it. It just wasn't the right time, and I plan on going back to it. But this is a very different flavor. It's a very different style. But in terms of the dense, throw you into it, you'll figure it out as you go along. There's a bunch of different people, and you just have to trust that Benjamin Wire is going to bring it all together.
Yep.
This is the closest that I've come to of like, oh, okay, yeah, that like similar wavelength. It's not similar in terms of like The Failures has a very weird flavor to it, a very specific flavor, and this has a very different one. But in terms of that stylistic idea, I guess I shouldn't be terribly surprised. So anyway, to continue with your recommendation, but
so actually I have the one solid answer to this, but I'm actually shocked that you bounced off The Failures because I felt like there was so much Book of the New Sun influence in there.
I think I'll come back to it.
Yeah. Especially because he also changes like it's actually apparent what his influences are as the story goes on more. But I got a lot of like Gene Wolfe in there for some reason. And I think he does say that he's a good artist or great artist steal or whatever in there. He mentions that he stole from X, Y, and Z. I think Gene Wolfe is one of the people he says he stole from, which hopefully turns you on to going back. But the actual answer to underrepresented is maybe maybe it's the wrong term, but definitely not talked about enough is Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn for sure. I know it's talked about. I know it's like brought up. Everyone's like, oh, I'm going to get to this one. Like it's on everybody's TBR, but Mike's book reviews loved it, read it. I think Matt's fantasy book reviews didn't like it at all. But to me, that book and how it was written, first of all, one of the reasons I picked it up is like, I had only read the first Game of Thrones book and then Clash of Kings, most of it. I was like, what inspired George R.R. Martin? All these authors are coming out with books that were inspired by Game of Thrones. Let me take my lack of knowing of what that reading experience is like, and let's see what inspired George R.R. Martin. And it was Tad Williams' Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And so I read it, and you can see the influences of George R.R. Martin from the things that he picked up in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. They're apparent. Like I guess the Gene Wolfe influence to Christopher Rocchio. But Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is absolutely not read enough. and I get why, because they're massive. The third book is, like you said, the longest in, I think, one of the longest published works. And every page of that story is beautiful to read. So there's nothing that I can talk down about it. It's slow burn. It's a slow burn for sure, but it's an excellent, excellent story.
And hey, there's an ending. So, readers have that to look forward to.
Exactly. And there's an ending. Yeah.
No, I love George's books, but it's worth the tease.
Yeah, exactly. It is.
So we've talked about, we have Mercy, Tears of the Fallen. Now I do want to ask, so readers famously OCD, we want everything to match all the hype. So can we get a guarantee that it'll be a matching set when it's all done? And can we get a promise from you, Chance Dillon, that there will be a similar cadence to all the following titles of like da 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 da, and not like your next one will be like a 2-word title or something that then throws off the rhythm of it?
Oh, okay. Here's the deal. The spines and the covers, 100%. I'm going to work with the same cover artist. Fortunately, I'm actually doing the second cover in July. I have a name. I'll talk to you. I'll tell you it off. Actually, I don't know. Have I told you it?
I don't.
Okay, I haven't told you. I haven't told you it. But there's the early alpha readers are going to help me. I have a list of a few titles. I had my working title, which is the one I intend on using. But if enough people want something else, I may be swayed. They're not all X of the X. I actually don't like that. I personally like the sort of the Christopher Rocchio approach. We get Empire of Silence, we get Howling Dark, we get Demon in White. We get like all these different things. I don't know. I like that cadence.
Well, he
I like.
began by talking about bucking the mold, and here he is doing it with the way he titles his books. You heard it here first.
Yeah. I think I'm like an OCD person. It's probably worst nightmare in that aspect. And sort of as far as like naming books. But when it comes to the spines and the covers, I am actually debating. I'm actually going to talk to my cover artist about this. I don't know if I want to go all four being a white backdrop, but there will be different colors, so it won't be there won't be red on the next one necessarily. As far as like the emblems on the book, the character on the side of the book is going to change based on. I have two options for the second book that I'll talk to you about it off stream. But so that cadence is going to be there. The spine cadence, I love that too much. I love the aspect of just like having a character on the spine for each book. That's just too cool for me to not put there. To toot my own horn. But as far as all four books being white, not sure. I might do like a white, dark red, black, gray, or I might do all white. I might do white, black, red, gray. I don't know. I'm trying to come up with that decision now. And again, talking with the cover artist, I think will help me come to some conclusions. And then talking to you, talking to the readers and friends and figuring out, what are we looking for,
Well, it's a beautiful cover. I mean, this is worth just the price to be able to have that on your shelf. It's worth it if for nothing else, but also, pretty darn good story inside too. So, I did want to just kind of as a concluding question here go. We've talked about quite a bit, this book, and then a second one that kind of finishes out a first arc, and then two more books after this. Do you have plans after Mercy? Is it just is your head kind of stuck in this world for the time being, or have you thought about like, oh, I could also maybe do this afterwards?
Yeah, so my head is definitely stuck in the world of Mercy, and I know that there's like mixed feelings about that. Like some people just want writers to go try something else and create a new world and do all that. For me, the goal is 4 books in this main epic, like arc 1 and arc 2, which books 1 and 2, books 3 and 4, and that's going to open up a can of worms. By the end of the second book, we actually start to see that about what's sort of coming in the future, and just how massive the world is. I mean, there's parts in the first book. There's some commentary and some dialogue that kind of hints at how big the universe actually is. And there's a lot to be explored in Mercy, and I just have so much fun exploring it that I sort of want to keep exploring it. And that maybe that changes after books 3 and 4. The goal was to do the 4 main books in the series, omnibus books 1 and 2, and then books 3 and 4. And then while that's going on, I want to be working. There's 3 standalone stories that I want to tell. There's some short stories that I'm working on, and maybe potentially a novella. I love the idea of a novella, and there's a Halvain novella that I want to explore. That I have like 8 or 9 chapters already written on. But I think deciding when to release and when to have that available is hard, because there's some things that happen from his perspective that I have to be careful on uncovering too early. It's like deciding when people should read it. So I have to work through that. There is a love story that I want to tell that involves the planting of the great trees. I think that is something that I've also started to explore. Just because, in some downtime between revisions, I explored that a little bit, and I think it's a really cool story. And, I love the idea of things not being what they seem. And then we have the archivist telling this story of Mercy, and the tears and sort of, the Alibis Erevain arc and Vial and all them. And, there's a lot that I want to get to. But Mercy seems to be the goal. TTRPG, by the way, would be my ultimate goal, is to create. I have already a whole character sheet with a subset of rules and classes and everything for a TTRPG that I would love to fund in the future, that I'd love to work on. But the story comes first. The world needs to be there for people to play a TTRPG and explore it on. So I want to uncover as much of the world as I can before that. And once that's done, then it's TTRPG time. And yeah, that's so far the plans right now. And then after that, I don't know. I'm gonna keep writing. So it's just a matter of, what I write that I'll figure out as I go.
Yeah, well, great answer. Good to hear that there will be more in this world still to come.
Yeah.
Well, to kind of land the plane here, I'll just say, thanks, Chance, for talking to me today. Thanks to everybody who's been watching for this long. Go check out Mercy Tears of the Fallen. As of the recording of this, and when we put it out, it won't be out yet, but you can get one heck of a deal on it for just 99 cents. I mean, you can't buy a candy bar for 99 cents anymore. And you can get a great book for 99 cents.
Yeah.
Mercy Tears of the Fallen. So, I never know how to end these things. We've been going for an hour and 35 minutes. I think I might go have a sandwich later.
What kind of sandwich?
Maybe peanut butter and jelly. That sounds good.
What kind of jelly?
Grape. You gotta go grape jelly. Yeah.
Okay. I agree.
But I need to go get some groceries first.
Do you put peanut butter on one half and then jelly on the other half, or do you put peanut butter and jelly on top of the other half?
I'm not a monster, so I keep them separate until you eat the sandwich. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Makes me a monster.
Well, we knew that from the book, so.
There's going to be a lot of people that are just not in on the bit.
Yeah. Man, what if we let this run out till an hour and 45? Wouldn't that be crazy?
It's just 9 minutes of this. Just 9 minutes of you and me staring at each other. I'm cool with that. What's that picture in the background?
That it's a picture of mountains and trees that my wife put up. So
those are two things that go together like peanut butter and jelly.
Her dad paints, but I don't think that's one he painted. I just realized I used to work for a congressman, and this is a pen from his old political campaign. So that's weird.
A local?
I forgot I still had this.
Local.
No, actually, we worked in
locality.
DC. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the congressman did. I didn't. I worked locally, but yeah.
Well, I know we're in the middle of this awkward ending bit, but I'd love to double down and ask questions about your DC experience.
Yeah, I wasn't a DCC experience. I can say that.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Dungeon Crawl, Carl.
All right. Goodbye, everyone.